My name's Jen, and I've been clean for 10 years. My 10-year mark was December 28th of just this last year. Um, I work in recovery. I have been working in the recovery field for 5 years now. I do outreach in my community. I help people that are struggling with mental health and addiction. And that's what led me to this career is my life choices. Let me start out with like the beginning of my life. My family is Pentecostal. I grew up Pentecostal. I grew up going to church. And my parents, on the other hand, they have always been in active addiction. They always used drugs. And they got divorced when I was very young. They had a super toxic relationship. I wasn't old enough to know about the toxicness of their relationship. As I got older, I got to learn more and form my own opinions. But directly after my mom getting divorced from my dad, she met my stepdad. And my stepdad was a godsend to me. Him and my mom, they really helped me get through life. My mom still continued to use drugs, but my stepdad, he was an alcoholic as well. So I guess I've always been around it, you know. My dad and my stepmom, my dad was an alcoholic. So no matter which house I went to on the weekends, no matter where I was, that's what I was around. And so growing up, all that stuff was normal to me, you know, like getting drunk on the weekends and fighting your wife or fighting your husband. These are things I grew up, you know, around. And there was times that my grandma would have to come and get me because my parents were intoxicated and fighting. And things were rough when I was a kid in my own house. Outside of my house, it was like normal. I can remember being little and my grandma having to come get me because my stepdad had hit my mom, and I never thought any different of him after that. Like it never changed my perspective of him. When I was young, very, very young, I was molested quite often, and I spoke up about it, and it kind of got brushed under the rug. So I thought, you know, maybe this is normal too. Addiction's normal, and molestation's normal, you know, like this is how I grew up, and I thought these things was okay. So when I would go to my friends' houses and I would see how they lived, and I thought their families was weird because they ate dinner together at the table and they would pray over dinner. And, you know, we didn't do things like that at my house. That's not how things went for me. And when my stepdad left my mom when I was 13, I became an unruly teenager. My mom allowed me to be that person, but I took it to extreme. She put me in JDC one time. One time I had to be in a mental hospital as a teenager. Life was just really chaotic, and that's what I was used to. So I continued to party and be wild through my early 20s, and that's when I got pregnant with my daughter. And like I said, I was happy that I was pregnant with my daughter, and I decided I was going to be a good mom. Well, my daughter's dad was not excited that I was pregnant, and he basically told me, like, you know, either have an abortion or raise that kid on your own. And in that moment, I thought, I'm not going to have an abortion. You know, I made this choice to have this baby, so I'm going to have this baby. And I continued on, and I was going to be a really good mom because I had to do it alone, so I had to be double good, you know. So I started college when I was pregnant, and I was going to college, and things was really good. I had my daughter. She was great. We was living with my father when I had her. My dad kept her while I worked. They was the best of friends, and he loved her so much. When she was 2, me and my dad got into an argument about my car one day. It was something really stupid, something that never should have even mattered. And we argued, and he said the worst things to me. And I told him that he was the worst dad, and I hated him, and I wished that he would die. And he left so he could cool down, and I could cool down. And he was gone for a lot of hours. And so I decided at that point I would go and apologize. And when I went to apologize to my dad at his friend's house, he was in the floor, and he was dead. I didn't know how to process that. Like, I didn't know how to face that, to deal with that. Like, I found my best friend dead. And I just didn't know what to do. I felt like my perfect life just crumbled right in front of me. So now I have this daughter, and I'm in my dad's house. That's like the most painful place to be. And I'm trying to raise my daughter, and I'm trying to graduate college. And I just couldn't. I didn't know what to do. So literally the same night that I found my dad dead, I immediately started shooting heroin, like that day. Like, I remember, and I never did drugs prior to that. Like, I smoked weed when I was young, like I said, and I did, dumb stuff when I was a teenager, but I never did heroin. And because that's what took my dad, it made sense for me to use heroin. So we buried my dad, I don't know, like a week later, and by that time I had been doing heroin every single day, and there was just no turning back from that point. And it's like, after I lost my dad, I just lost myself. Like, I didn't know how to find me. And I just continued, and it just got worse, and it got worse, and I couldn't keep a job. I ended up losing my dad's house that was left to me because I couldn't pay the bills, and the electric had been out for a long time, and I had candles around the house, and I would tell my daughter that we was camping out, and she thought it was the funnest thing, but really it was because I just chose to do drugs and not pay bills and not take care of my responsibilities because I was being selfish. And that continued on, and like I said, I lost my job, so at this point I'm robbing houses, and I'm stealing from people that I love, and I'm just hurting everyone that I love. And I wasn't taking great care of my daughter, and I would lock her out of the bathroom for hours at a time so I could use drugs. And my mom was in active addiction with me. We used drugs often together, my mom and my little brother. And it was normal in that time back then. It was so normal to me. Like, this is what I thought families did. Like, if you love your family, you share your drugs with them. That's what made sense to me. So I did, and I continued, and I remember the day that I went to rob the last house that I robbed. I remember getting up that morning, and I didn't want to leave because I just didn't feel good. I was dope sick, I was tired, and I remember getting up to leave, and it was 3 days after Christmas, and my daughter just wanted me to play with her new toys that I got for her for Christmas, and I was so dope sick and so angry that I just pushed her away from me, and I told her I would play with her when I got back, and I robbed that house, and it was the sheriff's house, and I didn't get to come home after that. That hug that I promised her that day, I didn't get to give it to her for 6 years. Because of drugs. I chose drugs over being a mom. And I can remember getting booked into the county that night and just wondering, like, who's going to take care of my daughter, like, who's going to raise her, because I'm not going to be able to. And I was scared, and it was like the first time that I had been scared for her, which isn't fair to her, but it's just the truth. And I was in the county for a long time, and when I got sentenced, I can remember being in the courtroom, and most of what the judge said sounded like Charlie Brown talking because I was just so numb and scared. And the judge sentenced me to 6 years in prison. And in that moment, I just didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know how I was going to move forward in my life. I couldn't see past that. And I didn't want to live. Like, I didn't want to live in that moment more than I didn't want to live in my active addiction, because I just didn't know how I was going to heal from that. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm going to go to prison. I've never even been to jail but for a couple of days. So I got a 6-year sentence, and I can remember my mom telling me, like, It's okay, I got Ty, I got her. And it didn't make me feel any better. I can remember being in the county and contemplating just killing myself, because that would have been better. That would have been better than going to prison for 6 years. So I can remember them waking me up that morning to go to prison, and I was nervous and I was scared. And I got there and I felt so out of place. I wasn't like those people. I wasn't supposed to be a dope fiend in prison and not coming home for 6 years. Like, I wasn't them people. And I was. I had to be those people. So I got to prison and I was trying to figure out how to get out of there. You know, like, I had this paper that said I could judicial. So I knew if I just wrote a really nice letter that said, hey, I'm going to be good and I'm going to do good, and that they would let me out. And I didn't want to do good. I was still angry. I was angry that I didn't have a dad. I was angry that the drugs didn't kill me. And I wanted to get out and I wanted to try again, because I didn't know why I failed and he didn't. So about 2 years into my sentence, I finally got to see my family. I think it was really hard for them to come and see me in prison. I think it was hard for them to accept who I had became and for them to have to leave me in that place. So 2 years into my sentence, my grandma came and my mom and my daughter came. My daughter was so big and she loved me just the same as she did when I left, and I didn't know why. I didn't know how. I didn't deserve for her to love me. At that visit, she basically told me that she'd never seen this mom that she had that day. She was used to a mom that was just looked dead, you know? Like, when I was in active addiction, I looked terrible, and I didn't think so. And she was rubbing my face, and she was telling me that I was the prettiest person she'd ever seen, and it was just great. It was the most amazing thing that I think I've ever experienced in sobriety. It was just having her love me after what a shitty person I was. And at that visit, my mom was talking to me about my grandpa, and, you know, like, I left that part out of my story. I'm sorry, I'm gonna backtrack for a second. I skipped through that. In my active addiction, my family, they are all Pentecostal. They go to church. Like, I have a really amazing family, and I grew up in amazing family life. My direct home was just a little bit different. So when I was in active addiction and I would be homeless with my daughter, you know, my grandparents, they always let me come to their house, and they let all of us grandkids move in with them. We all had hard times. Mine just looked a little different and were for different reasons. My grandparents and my aunts and uncles basically helped raise me, and then consequently helped raise my daughter. So the day I got sentenced, my mom and my grandma was there, and like I said, they had went back home, and my grandpa had waited. He said he just couldn't go with them to watch me get sentenced. And at that visit, my mom came. She said that, you know, when they told my grandpa how long I was going to be in prison, he was sure that he wasn't going to be alive when I came home. My grandpa is the greatest man I know. Next to my dad, you know, he's my hero. And the thought of never seeing him again, I just couldn't even wrap my head around it. Like, for him to just have to die and just think that, you know, I'm just a dope fiend. Like, I didn't want that. So when I left from that visit, I just did everything that the prison would offer me, like classes and college and groups and trauma groups. And like, I just tried to face all that stuff head on, you know, that all that stuff I was scared of, all that stuff I ran from that kept me in active addiction. I tried to face it because I was in a safe place and I could get drugs there, but I didn't have to choose that, that wasn't all that was there. So I took all these classes and I did everything to just be better. And I got to the end of my sentence and I had to go to a halfway house, which was okay. And I can remember getting ready to come home from prison, and I was so scared. And I was scared and I was excited and I was nervous. I didn't know what the future held, and I was sure that it didn't hold anything, because why would it, I'm just a shitty person, so why would it be okay? So I got to the halfway house, and naturally my family that never gave up on me showed up, and they brought me these clothes and a phone, and I got to see my daughter that day, the day I came home. I had to stay in the halfway house for about 6 months, which I think was great because it was a good transition for me. I got to get a job and learn how to work and save money, and I didn't really know how to be a part of society, so it was a good transition for me, and I had really, really good RAs there that helped me. And when I got out of prison, I went to my grandparents' house because, again, they let me come home because they always saved me. And my daughter was still living with my mom at that point. My mom's still in active addiction at this point, and I just couldn't be away from my daughter for any more seconds of my life because I had missed so much time with her. So I moved in with my mom, which I knew was a really dangerous situation for me because I had used drugs with my mom for a long time. I left that part out because I didn't want to hurt my mom, and I never want people to think bad of her. She just was an addict too, just like me, and sometimes we do things that we wouldn't do sober, so I didn't want anybody to think bad of my mom, but she was still in active addiction when I came home from prison, so I moved in with her so I could be with my daughter, and it was hard, but my daughter was so excited to have me. She had a mom that she never had before. And I stayed there for a while. I met my fiance at the time that I was at my mom's. And we saved our money and we got a place. And we moved with my daughter into our house that we have now. And I got a job at the Fringe when I came home, the Fringe Coffee House. And that was like my last ditch effort was trying to get a job there. Because when I was in the halfway house, they had like a contract with like factories and places that would just naturally hire you. So when I came home, I didn't have that help when I got back to my own hometown city. And nobody wanted to hire me. I went to prison for robbery, so that was really trying for me. And I got to the point that I thought I was going to give up, that I thought, well, I could still rob houses, but if I don't use my money on drugs, then I can take care of my daughter. And, I think I just still wasn't completely out of that mindset. I was in like a fight or flight mindset, and I didn't want to lose my daughter again. And I just wasn't thinking clearly. So I went to the Fringe. It's a coffee house that only hires felons. And I didn't know prior to walking in, that they only hire felons like me. So when I went in, I told them, hey, I just want to tell you up front, I went to prison for robbery. And Patrick said that, I was perfect for the job. I just couldn't even wrap my head around it. So they hired me. And Patrick and Sarah trusted me so much. And I think that they'll never know how much that restored my faith and my hope, and it just saved my life in that moment. I worked at the coffee shop for a long time, and I ended up earning their trust so much that one day they gave me the keys to the shop and told me to lock it up. And in that moment I knew hey Jen, you know what? You're doing something right. Just keep going. Just keep going. And I did. I just kept going, and I met a lot of people working there that worked in the recovery field, and they're like, Jen, you would be great at this. And so then I got a job working in the recovery field. I was working at Genesis, and my boss there, she basically taught me everything I knew, and I realized that I loved it and it was my passion. And I never dreamed in life about having a passion, like it just wasn't something that I thought I would do or was capable of, because I grew up in addiction. I grew up with parents that really didn't have any goals. Just their goals was to pay their bills. They didn't dream. So I learned how to dream again. And they took a chance on me at Genesis. And I got my foot in the door and I fell in love. And I was able to promote and do more things there. And in this time, my mother's still in active addiction this whole time. And I'm having to keep my distance from her, but love her at the same time because it's my mom, And I left from Genesis and I got a job. I do outreach in Cincinnati, and I help people with severe mental illness and people in addiction and people that are battling homelessness. And I get to help people every single day and be this light that I wish somebody would have brought to me. I don't ever remember a time when I was getting high. I don't ever remember a time that somebody was like, hey, Jen, you want to go to treatment? Like, that's an option. I don't ever remember that happening, and maybe it did, but I just don't remember that. So for me to be somebody that's in long-term recovery, to go to these people and give that option to them, it feels really, really good. Really good. So a dream of mine has always been to open a sober living, and I've been working on that. That's something that I'm doing currently in my life. Right before my 10 years, a couple weeks ago, my mom was, my grandmother reached out to me because there was something wrong with my mom. And, I always just know that, I just wait for the day that I'm going to find my mom. Like I'm going to find, like I found my dad. And I went to my mom's and she wasn't great. She wasn't doing great. And I got her to the hospital and she's been there since, but she's about to celebrate 30 days clean, which is so huge for me. So huge for me. So where I am today, I'm still helping people get clean, and I'm still clean today. And it's been a rough road, and it's definitely more beautiful on this side. I have things I never dreamed I would have. I have savings accounts, I have cars, I have a house. I have my family that trusts me and loves me, and they don't pick their purses up around me anymore. And I have a relationship with my mom. And I'm learning to forgive myself for who I was and the things that I did. And life's just beautiful on this side. I always put myself in front of everyone. Like, the selfishness of addiction is so crazy to me. Like, who I am today, like, I don't know how to put myself in front of anyone. Like, I'm not even capable of that today. And in my addiction, like, I was the most selfish person. Like, I was such a monster. How do I remember that girl? Like, when I try to think about, like, what it was like using drugs, I can't even fathom it. And I can remember doing drugs, and I couldn't fathom what it was like to be without them. And I just remember just being such a terrible person. Like, I don't even know how I was capable of that. What I can tell you is that drugs and alcohol make people someone that they never intended to be, somebody that God didn't intend you to be, and most of my life I blamed God for things that went wrong in my life. Like, it had to be his fault that my dad died. It couldn't have been my dad's fault, It was God's fault because God didn't want me to have a dad, and he wanted to just ruin my life, and so let me help God ruin my life. And it took me a long time to come to terms with, that we choose things that happen in our life, things that go wrong, that's just our own will. We took it into our own hands. And I can remember getting arrested like once or twice prior to going to prison. And one of those times I took drugs into the jail, and I thought that was the coolest thing, because everybody wanted to be my friend, naturally. Drug addicts want to be drug addicts' friends. addiction was just really rough. I didn't have any morals. I didn't care about myself. I didn't have any self-respect. Like it was just a disgusting situation for me. I think I think being a generational curse breaker, like this is something that my family has battled for a long time, and I think just being able to show my daughter that, hey, it's okay, and we can bounce back from this, and like just being able to be somebody that she's proud of is huge for me. Being somebody that I'm able to be proud of is a big deal to me. I think the last thing that I will say is that if you need help, there is help out there. Like, people will help you. And sometimes you just have to be in the right situation for people to want to help you, you know? If you're around only people that use drugs, they're not going to offer that help. And I just want somebody to see the light, you know, to be able to see that light in their eyes again. I forgot what that was, and I forgot who I was. And I remember today.